That would be great.
If we could go ahead and force mute anyone, please feel free to do so. In addition, as we get started, I will go ahead and share my screen just so that you can follow along with me today. That will be wonderful. And so as we know how important it is, I want to say thank you very much to the collective and the collaboration of the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence, as well as colleagues from the United Partners for Human Services and INIE. And so with that, let's recognize the role, the critical role that nonprofits play within our nation and certainly across the world. And this is just some really great stats from the Nonprofit Council, and really talking about the breadth and the impact that nonprofits and the nonprofit community and those of you that are continuing to serve have. And when we think about it, millions of employers and board members and donors and volunteers. And we know that we are the community who care for people and really help to sometimes fill that gap as we continue to move forward. And so I've included here just some of the awesome organizations that I've had an opportunity to work with throughout my career, certainly starting with the Salvation Army, working with pregnant and parenting teens and runaway and homeless youth, and then continuing to work throughout higher education, as well as in the arts for a music association and continued work with advocacy organizations as well. And so know that you are an invaluable resource that we have within our world. And what that ultimately means is, right? And so as we think about the fact that the time is now, the time is actually a huge opportunity for transformation. Everything from I think of certain movies, right? Now is the time, right? To running out of time, to once upon a time, to even Shirley Chisholm, who said the time is now. And that's where ultimately I think about, yes, how the time is now. And we know that as we continue to transform, it's truly important for us to think about how then we move through community and move through community through diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so some of those key elements are to make sure that we understand the demographics and understand the dynamics of the demographics. We also want to make sure that we are clear, number two, about how we let data be a factor to drive our decisions. And we also want to make sure that during this process, we are telling and owning and honoring the truth. We know that Tallahassee is currently the 12th fastest growing metropolitan area in Florida, with a growth rate, if you can believe it, of 12.4%. I know many of you know that. And we also know that Leon County is a highly educated city in Florida. And we also recognize the various education levels. And we also know that there are certain poverty levels throughout the state and throughout the county as well. And so it's really important when we think about education, when we also take a look at what the average household income is. We also recognize the importance of the demographics as it relates to race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability. It's really important to recognize how all of these demographics come into play. And as you all have continued to do, to continue to acknowledge the history that has come before us and continue to tell the history. So yes, recognizing what the name Tallahassee, where that comes from, and also whose land you are settled upon, if you have a physical location, and also continuing to recognize whose land we are continuing to operate on as we think about the indigenous peoples of Tallahassee. So that is absolutely critical for us as we move forward. And then as we think about then again, the importance of telling, owning, and honoring the truth, we also want to continue to make sure that we, number 4, reflect and celebrate on what we have overcome, what are the options ahead, and where are the opportunities that we as professionals can continue within our communities with the populations that we're serving, continue to maximize upon. And that's where ultimately it's really important to make sure that as you are looking at your diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that you connect it back to your purpose, your mission, and your vision. All right. And so how many of you have had an opportunity to outline in alignment with your purpose, mission, and vision, your DEI statement, your DEI principles? How are you integrating that throughout all of those areas? Go ahead and let us know in the chat where you are on that journey. And definitely we will look forward to having a conversation about that a little bit later as well. And so, you know, as I think about it, I came into this work in the 1990s, and I had an awesome opportunity, and you'll see some of my artifacts here. I had an awesome opportunity to travel to South Africa and do a 6-week social development of South Africa study tour with one of my faculty members. And it truly, truly touched my heart, opened my eyes. We had an opportunity to spend time in the homes of individuals and folks that worked in and lived in the villages, as well as within the NGOs in South Africa. And this was also during the time of Truth and Reconciliation. And so that's where, for me, I think very much about Nelson Mandela's quote, where he said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." And so it was in the 90s that for me, that transformation truly started. And I from there, really felt that it was important to continue that work. And then that's where we get to the One America initiative that happened again in the 90s. And I think also about Nelson Mandela's quote here, where he says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." And there's more to that quote if you definitely want to look it up. However, the element there was that I had an opportunity to really, when I was in the Syracuse and Rochester community in upstate New York, to become a dialogue facilitator and facilitate community dialogues around race and how we work and needed to come together. And can you believe it? Look at where we are 25 years later, right? Or 20 something years later, recognizing that some of the same conversations are happening, yet they are certainly happening in a nuanced and different way, given everything that we are and have been seeing within our communities. So it's all about having that opportunity to transform community. And that's where I will ask you, how are you participating in dialogue? Let us know in the chat. How are you participating in dialogue? How are you participating in truth and reconciliation? What are some of the steps that you have taken to continue to do that within your organizations? And I know that we've got some comments that are flowing into the chat, and that would be wonderful. So the question is, how are you participating in dialogue? How are you fostering and participating in that truth telling and the reconciliation process. And so as we think about, yes, having transparent confirmations with immediate circle, I think that's great. That is definitely a place to start. And we also want to continue to begin to think about what is it within our organizations that we can continue to do. And I know many of you are doing some key initiatives. So please post those in the chat as well in terms of what initiatives you're doing to continue to foster the dialogue and to foster the truth-telling process. It's absolutely key to be able to help people of varying backgrounds come together to learn from one another, to learn about the history, to learn about the tragedies, to learn about the hurt, and to figure out a way to move forward together. And so that's where we think about transforming community through diversity. And as we do that, that's where I also want to encourage you to, number one, make sure you hold on to history. And what I mean by that is never forget. There's always an opportunity to integrate history into what you're doing, whether it's land acknowledgement, providing tips and facts, whether it's certainly integrating through music, art, and culture, writing, even your visuals. How are you continuing to hold on to history in the services that you're providing and in the programs and opportunities that you have before you? And then making sure that you connect it to culture. How are you also looking at those populations that you serve and connecting it to their culture? How are you allowing people to see themselves in the services, programs, and events that you hold, whether it's a grant that you're offering, or whether it is a particular program where you're bringing people together, or whether it's actually day-to-day services that you're providing to your clients. And then point number three is, how do you then own the outcome? How do you make sure that you own the outcome and have accountability for your transformation in the community? And then you also want to make sure that you continue to correct yourself, right, through the learning process, and continue to guide others along the path. Please don't allow yourself to stay in complacency. Don't allow others to stay in complacency. How are you guiding and introducing new information, new opportunities that people can take advantage of? Next, we also look at transforming our community through equity. And it's really important that we have principled, ethical leadership. And how are you continuing to hold yourselves accountable as principled leaders, and then making sure that you share the power and the privilege that you have? Because we all come from a variety of backgrounds, and it's important to even acknowledge the privilege and power you have. I acknowledge I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and although Syracuse, New York is on the top 10 list of one of the poorest cities in our nation, I had the honor and the privilege to be able to go to, at first, Xavier University, and then transfer back home to Syracuse University to complete my undergraduate and graduate degrees. Not everyone that looks like me necessarily has that opportunity. Not everyone that doesn't look like me has that opportunity to be able to go to a university that literally is $50,000+ a year at this point. So I have to recognize that when I show up in spaces. And for example, when I was working at Europe with students who come from all walks of life, and yet have amazing potential, helping them to earn an associate's degree such that they could certainly go out into the world and start to work. And within that, I really had to own my power and my privilege because my experience was not like their experience. And it was very important and very humbling to make sure that I did that and to also have those conversations and continue to share that power. And that's where we also, through equity, have to continue to break down barriers. And we do that through access, making sure that people have access that we didn't have, or that we provide access intentionally. And this is where we have to continue to ask ourselves, who is included? Who is left out? Who is missing? Whose voice do we need to hear? What are the policies and procedures that we have in place that could serve as barriers for someone to access our services? How are you having those conversations? When you have certain policies and procedures and or different dynamics, are you asking yourselves, how does this impact certain groups to be able to access our services? So that's really important to begin to think about how we transform through equity and some of the key elements in terms of principled leadership, sharing that power and privilege, and certainly breaking down our barriers. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we are transforming community through inclusion. And how do we continue to do that? We continue to make sure that we are inviting others in. So that's where I say invite us in the sense that we have to make sure that we are doing the reach out and not always expecting our clients, other organizations to reach in. We have to continue to go out and reach out to everyone that we want to ultimately pull in and make sure that they have a place in our community and within our services. And as we continue to think about the journey, then we do need to think about how we transform our community through justice. And that's where it's important also to recognize that as we think about social justice, we know that all of these elements around social oppression and prejudice and racism and ageism and homophobia and elements around allyship and ways that we continue to share power and privilege, all of that gets wrapped in. And so, yes, it is our responsibility to make sure that we are daring leaders. And that's where I love Brene Brown's quote here, where she says, daring leaders who live into their lives are never silent about the hard things. And so we have to make sure that we continue to not be silent about the hard things. And how are we speaking up and speaking out within our communities? And that's where we also come to this concept around our journey. So here you'll see how are we and how are you fostering connection and belonging? How are you fostering accountability? How are you as well assessing the value with reaching out versus reaching in? And then, of course, what's your plan? Do you have a strategic plan where you are including elements around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, or JEDI, if you want to call it, around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion? How are you hearing in terms of getting feedback, whether it's feedback surveys, listening sessions? And also want to encourage you to start small. Some of you have a lot of resources in terms of staff, time, and talent. Some of you may not. So you want to think about where can we start and how do we then scale up? And then, of course, making sure that we're crafting those necessary statements, our principles, our positions, and our core values are very well known. and how that connects to our mission, our purpose, and our vision. And of course, we have to make sure that we also identify our leadership structures and our approach to continuing to diversify our leadership. Also on this journey, we know that we need to continue to promote awareness within ourselves and others, continue to have the cultural competence that's necessary, as well as the cultural humility that it requires and how we hear all of the necessary voices. And how do we get to a place of cultural intelligence where we feel that we are able to truly kind of move through a variety of communities, recognizing that we know the demographics and we have a sense of what the data and the research is also telling us, both quantitative in terms of the numbers and qualitative in terms of the voices that we're hearing and the feedback that we're getting. And then we also have to be very cognizant about our marketing and our outreach. What images are we using? How are we making sure that they're historically relevant? How are we also avoiding cultural appropriation and making sure that we are utilizing our tone in our marketing and our outreach, as well as our visuals? And then, of course, the communications and the conversations that we're having. How are we continuing to dig deeper and have greater communication and greater conversation? And so that's where I want to encourage you to continue to build that cultural connection, everything from cultural awareness through to the cultural competence, the humility, all the way through to the conversations and the communications that we're having on one-to-one group levels as well. And so as we continue to wind down, I truly believe that if we exercise care and compassion, and I highlight this in my book, around the fact that I truly believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion allows our level of curiosity and inquiry to deepen about each other, to really provide enough energy for us to stay engaged in dialogue, in relationship, and in partnerships. And so as we continue to be on this journey, it's important for us to be open. It's important for us to really honor, appreciate, celebrate one another, and aspire to the justice, the diversity, the equity, the access, and the inclusion that we have for our world. And with that, I will also close. I wrote my first book, or books rather. There's a leadership edition that has some additional entries during the pandemic. And then as we have been in this new frame and heightened awareness around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I often see that we have continued to cluster certain groups. And so I think that, yes, that can be helpful in one regard. Yet I also want to make sure that we remember that we need to continue to hear people. We need to continue to see people. We need to continue to value people for who they are and the essence of who they are. So I wrote a poem that's called I Am Not an Acronym, and I will share that with you today. From BIPOC to LGBTQIA+ to ALANA to BAP, I am not an acronym. I am not a set of letters to be lumped together with others who may or may not share a common historical context, experience, or oppression. See me, hear me, value me. Therefore, I am not an acronym. I am not to be summarized by a short term that reduces my power and presence, yet emphasizes someone else's privilege and status. Therefore, I am not an acronym. I am amazing in my own right. My people, my heritage, my culture deserves the 30 extra seconds to say Black, African American, Hispanic, Latino, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native, Indigenous, Puerto Rican, Cuban, Iroquois, Cherokee, Kenyan, Senegalese, Chinese, Japanese, lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, disabled, transgendered, intersex, asexual, or however I choose to identify. However, I am not an acronym. I was born Mariama, Mariama Saran, Saran, which happens to translate into some cultures, beautiful gift of God. So I am not an acronym, because no gift of God should ever be reduced to a short term that reduces his or her power and presence, yet emphasizes someone else's privilege and status. And take enough time to learn my name, call my name, ask me how I wish to IDENTIFY. Then maybe, just maybe, you'll start to see that my people, my heritage, my culture deserves the 30 extra seconds to be recognized. See me, hear me, value me. Finally, I am not an acronym. I am not BIPOC or LGBTQIA or ALANA or BAP. I am me. M.S.B. In unity, thank you for having me today. Mariama Saran, Boney.
Wow, I think you're seeing lots of appreciation and gratitude for being transparent and vulnerable and sharing that beautiful and lovely poem. Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
what
much.
a great reminder to all of us that we all have an experience, we all have a journey, we all have a story, and we are all to be valued. Thank you so very much for sharing that.
Thank you, everyone. And so I think now we're going to have a short Q&A just in case there are any questions.
Yes, so I haven't seen any come through. Felina and Kathleen, please let me know. But I think for me, as part of this cohort, I would start with, we as our 3 individual organizations focus on what resources and tools can we continue to equip our constituents, our membership with, to be as poised and as prepared as possible to begin this journey. And we love adding the justice piece to the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece. But for those that maybe, want to get started in this discussion and this journey as an organization or even as an individual, you've shared some good tips about what to do and how to start. But where would you recommend they truly start?
Yeah, and I think that that's a really great question. Everyone is going to be on a different spectrum, because some of you are just starting in the process, and some of you may be further along in the process. And so that's where earlier I had these sets of blocks here in terms of really figuring out kind of where you are on this journey. Certainly if you already have your statements and you've already identified your positions and related to DEI and how that integrates into your mission, vision, and values, then you may be ready to go on to thinking about how you are going to develop a plan, and also how you're going to use surveys to gather that feedback. Or some of you may be at a place where you are identifying a leadership structure and identifying an approach. And so that's where you also have to connect back into accountability and figuring out how you're going to reach out versus reach in, and really assess the value that you're bringing here in this red block to your organizations. And then some of you may be on that journey where you are on this element around cultural awareness, and you're continuing to learn, and then you're moving through to cultural competence, which gives you an opportunity to dive deeper into various cultures. And then you think about cultural humility, where that gives you an opportunity to be open to others and really hear about others' experience and really manage the power imbalance that often exists when we're in our nonprofit organizations because we know best, right? And so we have to recognize that even though we have a 501c3, 501c6, 501c4 structure, that's still a system. And we have to still operate within a larger system that has continued to perpetuate oppression. And so we have to figure out how within the system that we operate within and what that means in terms of the system that we represent. So that's where we have to continue to be humble and listen to the voices of those that we're serving. And that's that cultural humility and what that requires as well.
Absolutely, which ties in perfectly with our first question from Kelly Otte. And can you speak a little bit to cultural humility in terms of managers, executive leadership within nonprofits, what that means and how to be good at it?
Yeah, certainly we want to make sure that we are at many different levels understanding who we're serving, the backgrounds of the folks that we're serving. And we take some of those same principles that we have learned as executives, as practitioners in the field, and we apply that to our staff. Get to know your staff, get to know your managers, get to know what's important to them culturally within the organization. Everything from policies, procedures, to holidays that you celebrate, to how they share their culture with you, how the team shares their culture. And so we do have to be have cultural humility as leaders, absolutely, because it goes a little bit beyond the competence piece in the sense that we are really hearing from those that we work with, those that we are on teams with, those that we supervise, quote unquote, and manage, more about them, more about what they prefer, such that we can balance some of that power, because there's automatically, as an executive, going to be that power that exists. I've served as an executive director in many different organizations and also in senior leadership. And so we're already walking into the room with that. So we have to continue to be aware of that.
And I think that ties into another question, and we've got quite a few coming through now. With what's your best advice to predominantly white organizations who want to diversify leadership on both the staff and board level, but not doing so in a tokenizing way?
You've got to do the reach out. And that's where I talked about the reach out versus the reach in. So often all we do is just post our position. And so that's great. That's wonderful that your position is posted on your website. Who's actually going to see it? What is your plan within your board for how you're going to do meaningful outreach to individuals that they know or people that they know, right? And so the other piece around that is that you as the exec have to expand your network. If everyone around you looks like you, that's a problem, to be very transparent. If everyone, and that means that you've got to get yourself in other circles. You've got to do some research and figure out what other organization meetings, events, etc., can you go to in an authentic way to learn, and then expand your network. And again, the concept of 6 degrees of separation, I totally believe in it, because it has also really truly helped me be able to tap into certain communities. And I have colleagues from a variety of backgrounds. And I think that that's really important. So you've got to expand your own network and get yourself out of that box as well. And then do that meaningful outreach. Have a key plan for who you're going to outreach to, how you're going to outreach, how you're going to share the information on Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups and on social media, and really, going beyond what you would normally do of the posting and, and sometimes sending it out to your partners and really having those one-to-one conversations. And that means that you've got to set time on your schedule every week or every other week or every month for doing outreach. You've got to prioritize it.
Yeah, it has to be intentional. I have a question from Ben, and then we'll go to Felina because I know she has a question. But from Ben, could you share more about the differences between inclusion and appropriation? And then specifically, what operational strategies would you recommend to theater people and other artists who want to include stories from a wide diversity of perspectives in our community without engaging in appropriation?
Yeah, so cultural appropriation is when, you're utilizing, symbols and even words from various communities in a way that harms that community. And so first, you've got to, number one, that's where you got to be aware, and you've got to develop that awareness and that competence. And as you are certainly moving through and developing and designing your theater programs, how are you asking people from the various communities to give you feedback? And that's where, if you aren't, then that means, again, you've got to open up and broaden your network and ask people to say, we have this production that we're working on. We would really, we'd love to get some feedback from your community, whether it's a Native community or we're not quite sure on the terms, and I think that's the other piece that cultural humility allows you to do, is to make sure that you recognize you don't know it all. That's where we talk about the power imbalances. So often we think we know everything when we are working in these organizations, or we're expected to know everything. And cultural humility gives you the entree to be able to say, I don't know it all, and I'm going to seek the information out on my own, as well as ask for some assistance. And so that's the other element, is how are you reaching out to various communities as you're developing your programs, as you're developing your content, to really think about the programs that you are launching. I used to work with a Music Educators Association, and all the conductors that we would have come in for choir or orchestra or, various performances, we really made sure and asked conductors to develop a culturally competent repertoire of songs for the students to learn. And part of that means that they've got to do their work and research, and we do too as well.
Great, thank you. Felina, you had a question.
Thank you so much for sharing your poem this morning. It really hit home. And one of the things I just wanted to bring up, as being a partner with this amazing cohort with Amber and Kathleen, these two dynamic women, I will tell you, I didn't know I was BIPOC until one of them had introduced it to me about 6 months ago. So I was like, great, a new title. And so your poem speaks heavily to that. Can you address the marketing that our nonprofit organizations are doing that have the tendency to always put the face of nonprofit as being those who are people of color? Unfortunately, from what I understand from the marketing perspective, it's just the face of nonprofit, and poverty seems to be the people of color. Can you address that? Because I saw that marketing was part of your JEDI model.
Yeah, absolutely. And the marketing piece is absolutely critical as well, because that's where you have to, what I often call, master your message. And within that, that's where you've got to really be very intentional. And sometimes it takes training on your part. It may take training on your marketing manager or director's part or coordinator's part, because it all connects back into that cultural connection. And to what extent do we have the cultural awareness to know that there are certain terms that not everybody is latched onto? So for example, when we talk about BIPOC and we talk about Latinx, there's a huge divide, depending also on what region of the country you're in as well. And so I asked, I have some Puerto Rican girlfriends and colleagues, I have some Latin colleagues, and I said, so what do you think about this term? Is it something you identify with? What do you think about Hispanic versus Latin, Latino, Latina versus Latinx? You've got to have a network and cultivate a network. And you have a huge network here to be able to ask some of these questions, and be able to understand then what's appropriate for marketing and communications? And how then are you utilizing a broad network of photos? You know, what kind of photos are you using? What access to photos? There's lots of really free resources out there in terms of photos and messaging and wording. And so often we are running from space to space, right? And we're just trying to get something out really quickly. I often believe to make sure you do the research before you respond and react. Do your research before you put a piece together, to be able to say, okay, do these images align with the message on this particular website or this particular web page? Do these images align with the title of what we're talking about? And so often I am in that vein, you know, even as I'm working with some of my clients, and even as I'm working as an interim executive director, because I do provide those services as well, you know, having a lot of conversations with the marketing team, because I also teach marketing and PR, to be able to say, okay, how do these images align with this particular title? Or for example, for one of our children's organizations, it's great. It was a great photo of children, yet the shirt was transparent, okay? And that was something that was concerning to me. And it wasn't that you could see everything, but I could see just a little bit of a silhouette. And so I had really had to step back and say, is this the image that we want? Even though, again, it was a beautiful picture of children, but I don't put pictures out with children where you're seeing their midriffs and where you're seeing what might potentially be underneath their clothing. I think it's important to think about, you know, everything even that much intently. How many children do we have represented in a particular picture? Or how many adults do we have represented? Do we have individuals who may be disabled or have varying abilities or have varying levels of disability or ability represented in these photos? And so I think the photos, the imagery, the language that we use, there are some guides out there that you can use, especially when it comes to journalism guides that have, and some of the colleges and universities also have some really great guides around terms, terminology, what to use and how to use them as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think, you know, great question, Felina. I think that helps kind of couch some of our discussions and work moving forward. You've spoke about this briefly, and we have time for, after this question, one more.
Sure.
But you know, a lot of times we work with organizations, nonprofits specifically, of all sizes. And we have some, you know, folks that are really eager to get started in this work. And we have some folks that are scared to death. And primarily folks that look like me, white people, of older generations traditionally. So aside from the books that you've written, which I can't wait to get my hands on, what are some resources by way of books or reading that would be a really great place to start to just get folks entrenched and outside of their own thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'll say, and you all saw this on my slide, if you're on this call, if you have in any way, shape, or form an opportunity to impact communities and to impact lives, there is no option for you to sit on the sidelines as a leader. Leadership requires that we dive in wholeheartedly into the areas where we are uncomfortable. It requires wholeheartedly that we jump in that pool, and that we also make sure that we can work through our own stuff, and that, yes, we do our own work. So I definitely will include in the PowerPoint a list of resources for you as well. And so everything from books around anti-racism, you know, so Ibram Kendi and some of the work that he has done, I think is really, really important. There are also some really great resources out there as well around inclusive leadership from Jennifer Brown. There are Robin DiAngelo, has written White Fragility. Some people love it, some people hate it. Some people are in the middle. There's also a really great book out there around white rage. Please don't write profusely. I'm going to make sure it's in the PowerPoint. Also, understanding more about racial battle fatigue. The American Psychological Association has some great concepts around racial battle fatigue, as well as microaggression. And Tiffany Jana is a great resource because she talks about overcoming bias, as well as she talks about acts of exclusion. I also, there's a great guide to allyship that's online that I will include as well, and how you can continue to think about how you unlock the power of diversity through allyship. We could do a deep dive on all of these topics. The 1619 project, I think, is amazing in terms of if you're interested in and needing to know and understand more about the history of slavery and the history of Africans and African American peoples. Certainly there are a lot of really great resources out there as well around Indigenous cultures. And there are some great DEI podcasts around seeing white, how to coach yourself as a leader, and also another DEI podcast, I'm looking at my list here, that I think is really good, and a link to an article that has a plethora of podcasts. So I think it's important that you, and then CAST. CAST is also a really great book as well that talks about, the journey of a variety of people within cultural backgrounds and the history related to that. So there are so many opportunities. And then there's videos and Netflix movies and just a lot of really even great TED Talks that are out there as well.
So what I heard you say is there is no lack of resources, and there's no wrong way to start. And I think, the fact that we have so many options and mediums is hugely impactful. So thank you very much.
Yep, just do something, like Nike says, just do it.
Before I turn it back to Kathleen and us for going breakout sessions, we have had a few folks ask for your slides, so hopefully that won't be a problem, as well as a copy of your poem. So I don't know if it's on your website, but we would love to have that circulated as well.
Yeah, the copy of the poem is not available. It will be in the next edition of my book. And so just want to let you know about that. However, I definitely will include the slides, and I will also add the graphic around cultural humility, because I saw I got some questions around that. And I will also add the resource list for you as well. So while you all are in breakouts, I'll do that, and I'll make sure to get that to our wonderful collaborators and partners for today.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mariama. And wow, it's just so inspiring. Thank you so much for this amazing keynote. And we're going to be going into these breakout rooms now and expanding this discussion. So technology, we hope, is on our side. So you should see 3 breakouts that you can choose from. Breakout number 1 is systemic racism and the impact on community. Breakout number 2 is disparity in funding for organizations led by people of color. And breakout number 3 is on board diversification. And you will have to choose one of these 3 and please stay in the room. So you should see some room choices coming up on your screen. So once you choose the room, then you'll be part of the you go into that room, and then we're going to stay in there until about 11:15. We've got some amazing facilitators too that you'll see, and then both Felina, Amber, and I will also be in these different rooms. So here we go. So go ahead and choose your room, and we'll see you back here at 11:15.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to have you with us. I know we've got folks coming back in. I think we are all set and ready to go. So yeah, that was really fast, I'm sure. And we know that you had some great time together. And so what we're going to ask you to do is We know that there were 3 rooms. And so if you would please go ahead and for this portion, we just want to hear what were some of the key themes that were shared. One thing that I think is important as we do that is that you share what you shared, right? Certainly if there was something personal that someone shared, if you would let them tell that story, but if there were key topics or themes that came up, that's really what we want to capture. So go ahead and post those in the chat, as well as we would love to hear from each room what were some of the key themes. So let's start with breakout room, I think 3, which is board diversification. What were some of the themes that came out in the board diversification room? And this does require participation for you to share your perspective. So go ahead and come off of mute, and you can also post in the chat.
One thing we found really useful in that breakout room about board diversification was the discussion about how having a really clear job description, a really clear set of skills that you're seeking, helps an organization recruit people who represent diversity without falling into tokenism. I thought that was a really helpful practical skill that we can use in making sure our job description is very specific.
Great.
And when that's filled by somebody who represents our target audience, who adds diversity to our board, we know that we haven't recruited that person just so that they can fill a description of a certain kind of ethnicity.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. That's a good theme that has come out. What other good themes came out of the board diversity room and discussion? Could be themes, challenges, opportunities.
Challenges are, I think, for some folks in the room was that they don't know where to go to find diverse board members. And so we were discussing, as I'm a board consultant, and I was just trying to give them some suggestions on ways to find folks who fit the bill. They're talented, they have the sets that you're looking for, but they just happen to be people of color. And so looking into, churches and fraternities and sororities and the Black Chamber of Commerce and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and finding those folks who have those skill sets in those particular areas. And so I was just suggesting that they widen their net in terms of
right.
they're looking.
Yes, expand the network. And then we also heard another theme around really tailoring in the role description as well. And being okay, I will add, to be clear also that you are open to and you're clear about what elements of diversity that you're looking for as well within the role description in a broad way. And a lot of times, if you have a statement around diversity, equity, inclusion, and principles, I think that that's also very important to include in those role descriptions as well. One last thought around board diversification. Anything else come up? I see disparities in funding. Thank you very much. Funding, yes, we do know that there are significant disparities in funding for nonprofits that are Black-led, that may have majority Black staff, or some nonprofits that are serving communities that have high disparities as well. The research is out there. We know that. Hopefully many of you are connected into the National Fundraising and Philanthropy Association, and also in your local area. Okay. We also have some great resources that are popping up in the chat, so definitely make sure to grab those as well. So we know funding came up a lot. All right, so let's move on and talk and highlight real quick as it relates to systemic racism. I'm popping around, keeping y'all on your toes. So systemic racism and the impact on community. What were some of the themes that came out for you all? Themes, issues, challenges in a broad sense.
I won't share from the discussion, which was way too short, might I add. But it was clear that conversations like this are imperative, not just for this space in our sector, but in general for our community.
Thank you.
And I think, recognizing that we are all accountable to this work and recognizing our role in whether individually or professionally in perpetuating systemic racism, which I thought was huge. And we started to get a little bit into how we would love to see our community kind of shift and what it's going to take. But again, my immense gratitude to both the Honorable Darryl Jones and Taylor Biro for their wisdom in that section.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So other themes that came out in systemic racism and the impact on community. A little tongue-tied there. What other themes came out?
Hello,
Yes.
I'm Darryl Jones.
Hi. Thank you. Yes.
I wanted to also add that one of the things that systemic racism that plagues us here in the South Side, my district is entirely comprised of Title I schools, stretching all the way from Fort Braden to Rickards High School. And as we look at what has been the economic recovery we've seen in our community, particularly in housing, we've seen it in every community except in ours. For what we know are purposeful issues regarding mortgage financing availability, also our school grades also impact our property values. And one of the things that I wanted to remind people that there is a connection between poverty and systemic racism and its purposeful mission to undermine opportunity for persons of color.
Yes.
And
Thank you so much.
And one of the things I thought was important was that as a school board member, to make it clear to our community that systemic racism is bad for business.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And there are some really great resources and tools. I mean, this has been researched for a very long time. I had the privilege and honor to facilitate a discussion with Rachel McGee, who who's an economist and has done a lot of really great research in this area. She wrote a book called The Sum of Us, The Cost of Racism and How We Can All Prosper Together. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that. And there's also some other resources that have come out recently, but thank you so much for bringing that up. This has definitely been researched for a very long time. Any other thoughts and comments around themes that came out from the systemic racism and the impact on community? Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. I do see again, disparity of funding came up again, accountability came up. Thank you so much. And then for breakout room number 2, disparity in funding of organizations led by people of color. Disparity in funding for organizations led by people of color. And first I want to ask you, did you all define people of color? And then, and how are you defining that? Because that looks very different for some of our communities. And then also, what were some of the themes that came out?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I know this turn of phrase, people of color, right? Everybody uses it and they say it so, and it sounds so glib. But what is the difference between people of color and colored people?
There's definitely a difference, in South Africa, there was definitely a difference, based on the system that they had there at that time, based on where you were according to your skin tone, whether you are a Black South African or a colored South African or a white South African. In the United States, we know that there's a history around people of color and colored people. And so sometimes we say colored people might mean people who are Black, Latino, Native. It could mean individuals who are Asian, which is my point is that we need to get to a place where we're really being clear about who we're talking about. And then some people use colored people interchangeably with people of color. So that's where I think it's important. As you all dove in, can you all tell me or tell us what were some of the themes that you talked about in terms of disparity in funding for organizations led by people of color?
So
that aligns very well with, the question that was just asked and all of the differences, right, and the dynamics.
So I was in the panel, right, and I happened to be a pretty white Latino, right?
Yes. Yep.
So we didn't get into that at all.
Okay. Thank you.
We glossed it and we went by. And that's a whole other conversation,
Yes.
But anyways, because if in addition to being Latino, I'm an immigrant. So, it's just yet another color to that.
Okay.
What one of the topics that we discussed that I brought up is that the funding for nonprofits in general is a problem, right? I mean, if we were looking at the numbers for INIE and Felicia sent me her numbers, and I did my little calculation. Over 80% of the nonprofits in Tallahassee are what I called survival mode nonprofits, which basically is under $100,000. And of course, if you look at it, out of those, it's really only like 600, which is, I don't know, maybe 30%. Oh, no, not even 30%.
Yeah. So within that, could you help us kind of clarify what that theme was that you saw?
So the thing is, those nonprofits are operational, many of them. And they're operational because of the blood, sweat, and tears of the people that are leading them, right? And that is, again, is general for all nonprofits. However, for people of color or minorities that don't come from a position of strength, that are not financially independent, that do not have really, there really is a huge cost of opportunity for them to devote their time to the cause as opposed to, keep accumulating or providing for their families, right?
Yes, thank you.
The cost of the sacrifice of self-funding these organizations is a lot higher for minorities in general. Quite frankly, we broadened it.
Thank you.
Than it would be for the traditional, wife of the wealthy white man in the South. That could be the leader of the charity, right?
Thank you so much. Thanks for those thoughts.
We also
one last, yes. Go ahead.
Oh, Mariama. So I was also in the room. It was a really great conversation. It did talk a lot about, we did talk about how using your privilege to also open up a space for people to come together. And so how do we, especially as traditionally white organizations, or, that we can open up and try to make connections, and specifically for BIPOC organizations to meet different leaders in our community or different donors in our community, connectors, so that we can try to create more equitable starting place, which is what was also brought up in the room.
Great, thank you so much. Wonderful. So there's definitely been some really great themes that have come out of all of the breakout rooms. I want to say thank you all for participating. And this is just the beginning, recognizing that this gives you hopefully a roadmap for you to begin to follow as it relates to how you're addressing these key issues, how you're integrating them into your strategic plans, and know that you are not alone. And that is one of the elements of the collective and the organizations that have come together today, is recognizing that you are not alone. There are services out there. And if you don't know, ask. Sometimes we also don't know what we don't know, and be open as well to being corrected, critiqued, and folks providing you the feedback. As leaders, we have to remember that we don't know everything, and we have to continue to humble ourselves and have that openness to learning, and do that reach out as well. And then if you have colleagues that are willing to do the reach in and tap you on the shoulder, try to, again, take that with the best of intentions, recognizing that we're all doing the best that we can unless we show different.
Ms. Boney, if I can, my name is Marcellus Durham, and I work for Community Action Agency. And I love what our sheriff here in Leon County, in Leon County, has got the initiative all in. And that's the collaborative effort of all nonprofit departments and all agencies to collaborate to help our community to be self-sufficient. And that's what we're doing here at Community Action Agency. We have a program called Getting Ahead, and we talk about those issues and those my right now moment, and we talk about theory of change. We talk about the community engagement, the self-assessments, and all that. Yeah. So I just want to say I think this is a great forum that we need to continue having a conversation. We need to start talking about our reentry, our returning citizens too, because they're coming and they need to be welcomed as well in our community when they come back into society.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. Okay. And so now I think we are ready to transition to the next portion of the program.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. I know we have about 20 minutes left, and this is going to be hard to do yet again, but we will make it happen. And thank you, Mariama, for helping kind of moderate this next panel discussion, but it will be rooted in how DEI has impacted you personally and professionally. And we are glad to have Antonio Montoya, Christal Cherry, Del Suggs, Taylor Biro, and Darryl Jones with us for this section. And I will turn it back to you, Mariama.
Wonderful. So for this section here, we're just, going to have a general discussion about operationalizing diversity, equity, inclusion in your organization. And so as we continue to move through our discussion, I would just like to ask that we have our panelists, if you could please keep your comments to a minute or a minute and a half or less. Yes, I do tend to time people. And because we really want to make sure as a ground rule that we're hearing as many voices as possible. So there may be some questions that I will ask to all of you, and then there will be some questions that I will point to just a few of you. Another element that we want to recognize is we recognize that everyone's doing the very best that they can, and that we also recognize that you are not here to represent a whole group of people, that you are representing your organization and or representing the identities that you bring to the table personally, should you care to share that with us. And then finally, I also want to recognize that as folks are sharing their own stories and or information, if there is anything sensitive that comes up, please feel free to go ahead and sit in those emotions. That's okay. We're all here to learn from one another. And we also want to make sure that everybody owns their own story. So certainly feel free to share all of the topics, themes that are discussed, but I do ask that if you feel like you need to share someone's story, that you please get that permission from that person, because everybody's story belongs to themselves. So with that, let's go ahead and kick this off. And we are talking about operationalizing DEI in the organization. So our first question, which yes, this would be a question that would be great to hear from all of you. And what we're going to try to do is maybe perhaps see if we can pin our panelists as well. And through Zoom, we'll see if we can pin you to the main area. And then the first question is, how does your organization engage in this necessary work? How has your organization engaged in this necessary work? Would you be willing to share with us maybe just one way, very briefly, your organization has engaged in this DEI work?
I can start. So two organizations, one, the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. We have shifted from, certain things like our investing in law enforcement to investing in safety and safe communities and transformative justice. We've also begun doing monthly aspiring white ally, white accomplice groups where we talk one-on-one with our fellow white people about how we uphold white dominance and about how we cause harm through whiteness and what makes anti-Blackness so insidious in our work. And the flip side of that, we also offer BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, healing groups monthly too, which is more for healing from some of the harm done by racism and white people, as well as the DEI panel for our policies and certifications that need to change.
Great, thank you so much. And Taylor, what organization are you with again?
The Florida Council Against Sexual Violence.
Great, thank you so much, Taylor.
Yeah, I can bring an example from Domi's station where I was executive director. What we did is, first of all, we were fortunate that we were right on the railroad tracks, which is the natural divide. So geographically, that was very intentional. But also, the best tool that we had was our internships and our, a program that came out of the internships, where we were very intentional to have representatives from both sides of the tracks, basically from FEMU and FSU, that would go to the universities to talk about our programs and make sure that we will engage, with people there. So having people that represented, the populations that we wanted to be at Domi, being part of those programs was, I think, a good thing to include, to add diversity to our community.
Thank you, Antonio. Appreciate it.
I'll jump in, Mariama.
Yes,
it's all right.
No.
Oh yeah, I guess I'm here in a sense representing COCA, and it's an interesting situation because our cultural community is very diverse. And so you'd think we'd have an easy time getting, filling our board with diversity. But it's also a challenge because artists tend to don't tend to affiliate, and so you've got a lot of independent people that we're trying to get to come together and work together, and so it's been a real, I think it's been a real challenge, and I know Kathleen and Marie are both working really hard to diversify our board and to bring that community representation in. But one of the problems that we all face is just the challenge of the statistics. If only 5% of your population are actually leaders and involved in leadership, and then you're taking 5% of an even smaller population, which is your minority communities, then it's an even smaller subset of people that you can go after to serve in your positions. And then if you add on other duties and responsibilities and things, it can be a real challenge. So it takes really a concerted effort to go out and find the leaders from the different communities that you can bring in and to be a part of the groups that you're trying to serve. But I just really deeply think it's important that your board reflect the community that you serve. That's just vital.
Thank you so much, Joe. And Christal, we're just going to have Christal chime in real quick. Christal, we'd love to hear from you, and then we'll circle back around.
I was trying to
thank
speak.
you.
No one, I guess.
Oh, Christal?
I'm here.
Thanks. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't work for a specific organization. I'm a board consultant, so I work with many organizations.
Thank you.
I do trainings with them, and I do some of the things that you suggested in terms of TED Talks and role plays and reading articles and books. And so those are the kinds of things that I do when I participate in DEI work.
Okay, excellent. Thank you
and
so
Darryl
much.
had some feedback as well.
Oh, okay, yes, yep. So what we'll do is we'll definitely hear from the panel for the whole questions first, and then we'll definitely open it up. So thank you all so much. Mr. Jones, yes, you had a thought or a question?
Yes, first of all, I wanted to respond to Dale Suggs. The COCA office sits in the shadow of Florida A&M University, the largest public historically Black college and university in the country. And it is armed with departments of music, arts, as well as the humanities. And so I can imagine from that robust population, I'm sure that COCA could find some willing persons who'd be willing to serve, who meet your sensibilities. On behalf of the school district, one of the things that we take great pride in, is that we enjoy the distinction of having the most diverse administrative pool of any school district in the state of Florida amongst our principals and our persons in leadership. Now, we also wrestle with the challenge of having a diversified faculty. And the problem for us is that there are not enough persons of color who are going into education as a profession. So
Yes, thank you.
And so that means that our ability to be able to hire more African-American males, most specifically, to stand in front of our classrooms is an enormous challenge. And so what I'm hoping that we will move to as we set our priorities is to incentivize the hiring of more diverse faculty and provide the types of incentive that makes it a whole lot more competitive for people to come to our community. And I believe if it's a value that we believe in, of DEI, then we have to make that certain that those values are reflected in our checkbook and our spending.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Thank you. And so are there any other questions or comments based on this first question about engaging in this necessary work? All right. So our next question, we know that everyone is really trying to make this impact and trying to change culture also within an organization. And we know that that is not easy. So if you would, it would be really great to hear from Del as well as Christal, Christal from the perspective of how you work with organizations as they're trying to change their culture. And then Del, would you mind sharing, how you are seeing the challenge and or the opportunity of changing culture within the nonprofit organization and structure?
Well, I think we have. I'm very comfortable with our culture at COCA. I think we're certainly supportive and we're seeking to do a better job. One of the challenges we face is ticking all the boxes. It's not just having people from different minority populations serving on the board. They also have to have certain specific other skills that are designated by our governmental standards. And so we've got to fill certain roles there. But again, my deepest belief is that our boards and the organizations that we represent and our organization itself need to reflect our community. When I served as the chairman of Florida's Winterfest, and I'll never forget watching a performer on stage one night after one of the winners of the talent competition was like an 8-year-old girl performing on stage, and there was a little a 7 or 8-year-old girl standing next to me, and she looked up and saw this girl performing on stage, and she just cried out. She said, "Look, she's just like me."
Yes, thank you.
And it just struck me that our we have to have leaders and our board members that others in the community can look at and go, "Look, they're just like me."
Thank you. And so that, Del, thank you. The points that you both were raising about representation and definitely the initiatives and also the challenges that you have highlighted, I think, and then also that Darryl, you talked about as well, are absolutely critical in terms of recognizing that it is a pipeline issue, as well as I want to again continue to emphasize a reach out issue, where there's an opportunity to reach out and really, and I think even Miss is it Cherry? Is that your first name? Is it Cherry or Christal? Is it your first name?
Christal's my first name.
Oh, Christal, okay. Yeah, and as Christal was talking about earlier about, different recognizing and knowing that there are other spaces and places to broaden those networks. So thank you. And Christal, could you also,
Mariama.
yes, I'll be with you just one moment. Just would love to hear Christal chime in on this concept around culture, Christal, and how you help organizations, manage and shift their cultures. And then Darryl will be right with you.
So when I first start with my clients, we do there's a research and discovery stage where we're doing some assessments about the culture. First, of course, I'm working with the board. So I'll do a board matrix to find out how people are identifying themselves. Have each board member fill out their own matrix. And then we look at the matrix collectively to see what that board brings to the table. We do an actual assessment, we do surveys, we just do all kinds of things for me to try to figure out how this board is thinking, how they're operating. We then look at the organization to make sure that the organization is in alignment with what the board is doing and vice versa, because you can't have the board doing one thing and then the organization doing something completely different. And when we start from the very basics, I mean, I work with them, I provide them with a glossary of terms, everything that we just talked about, bias and discrimination and allyship, and we talk about all of that. And then we just go through a series of steps and really getting the board to engage and interact in this work, recognizing that they have to look within first to make sure that each of them understand, first of all, that they're willing to do the work, because this is voluntary, right? And they're willing to invest the time to do the work. And then really delving in by doing some role plays and doing some real group work and having them do individual work, some reflection time. I give them homework where they have to watch TED Talks. I give them a homework where they have to read articles and read books. And sometimes people come back and they've not done the work. And so I say, if you've not done the work, then you're not serious about this work. And there's nothing I can do as a board consultant to change that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about that. And so really trying to just call people out and saying, this is uncomfortable, but we're going to call you out when you're not doing what you said you wanted to do. You said you wanted to do this work. If you're not doing it, then we're going to call you out, and maybe we need to have a different conversation. But really just kind of being honest and transparent. So I'm pointed, but not pointy. When I work with my clients,
thank you.
I come straight from the heart.
Excellent. Thank you. Darryl, you had a question or comment?
I also wanted to make it clear regarding the problem that we have in education. Until we as a nation put a priority on, particularly Florida puts a priority on changing the wages that we pay educators, we're going to continue to have a pipeline issue. That's our greatest problem. So here, even though we have FAMU with a College of Ed, young people are leaving Leon County and starting their careers in other communities in other states. At present, Florida is ranked 49th in terms of teacher salary compared to all the remaining states in the nation.
Yeah.
There lies an enormous problem. And so that we'll continue to have that pipeline issue and still have the issue of DEI relative to bringing more persons of color to the industry.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there are definitely some of those broader systemic issues. Thank you so much. And as we get ready to close out here, definitely want to just ask you to, again, think about your own leadership. And that's where I would love to hear from Taylor, Antonio, and certainly anyone else that would like to share about how DEI has impacted the leadership of your organization. Or let me, if I could tweak that a little bit, perhaps how are you leading through a DEI lens? So you could go either way. How has DEI impacted your leadership in your organization, or how are you utilizing a DEI lens in your leadership of the organization? And love to hear from Taylor and Antonio, and then certainly circle back around to anyone else.
Cool. So through a DEI lens, it's remembering that all oppression is connected, and that we're not going to get anywhere until we deal with what's in front of us. And I think we have a lot of work to be done with being stuck in the conversation phase. I think it's been a year of us having, I don't know, countless panels and workshops. And I think we're all a little scared of how to jump in and how to do this. And we don't want to do it wrong. And that's kind of stopping and stunting us. So what I've been trying to invest more in is jumping in and doing things and looking at change through a collective standpoint as instead of just an individual standpoint, and keeping in mind things like what Audre Lorde said, which is you cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. And a lot of this work needs to happen outside of the systems because the systems are not going to willfully change. They were built to do this, and we have to be brave and reimagine and take things apart brick by brick and build things smaller and more community-based and more relational with one another. So trying to step away from system and balance system-led and system-less activism.
Thank you. Thanks, Taylor. Antonio, how about you? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm a recording philanthropist right now. I mean, sabbatical from nonprofit work. But when I was in a position of leadership as executive director and chair of a board, one thing that informed my DEI is the fact that I didn't know I was a minority. I didn't know I was Latino until I asked for a visa, right? So it's a very interesting identity, right? You know, I go to the consulate and, you know, I have all my paperwork since 1994. No, even 1994. And, you know, I have my forms and there's race, which is something I had never been asked in Colombia.
Yes,
Right?
Thank you.
So I guess white, you know, I put, and then the guy said, no, you're not white, you're Hispanic, right?
Yeah.
Now, while I was
So how
leading
does that show up in your leadership? I'm very curious, you know,
Yeah.
when you know,
So
if you think about that experience, how did that show up in your leadership?
So the interesting thing is, you know, when we started nonprofit work, I was in Alabama. And being in Alabama, it became very interesting to see what the impact of being Latino was, because living in South Florida initially, I didn't feel much different, right? But understanding that you can feel different, you can feel treated differently, when I was never treated differently in my life, is what allowed me to make sure that when I was relating to somebody, I didn't assume, right, you know, what they felt or how they expected to be treated.
Great.
Right.
You.
So I think that the the problem that there is here is that, you know, external signifiers in the US, you know, they tend to be brought up too high.
Yes, thank you.
Whereas, you know, internally, you know, how do you know someone's true identity if you don't ask them?
Thank you for that. Yes, appreciate that. And we see a comment in the chat looking at systems, the time, treasure, talent is not focused on DEI. Okay, thank you so much. And we have to figure out how to look at options outside of the establishment. And so thank you all very much for sharing that. So Darryl, Del, Christal, any additional thoughts on how DEI should show up in our leadership, how it has for your leadership of the organizations that either you lead or work with?
Well, I'll say this. I think when we, you know, every 2 years we find ourselves in elections, and elections matter. And I think it's important that as we make our decisions on who we vote for, if DEI is not one of their values, if they don't believe in diversity and inclusion, and then if you vote for people, and then when the people come up for re-election, if they have shown themselves to not have that as one of their values, then I think it's important that those of us who are enlightened make the appropriate choice to take them from office, because persons without that perspective do a whole lot more damage than good.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Del, if you want to come off of mute for us, please feel free. Anyone else? Or oh, there we go.
I'll just jump in here real quick, because I I want to encourage all of us to approach this with love in our heart. I mean, I don't want to be too hokey about this, but I want us to understand that there are people with goodwill everywhere we are and everywhere we go. And I just want us to approach this this issue with that way. You know, don't automatically assume that somebody is opposing you, and don't try not to have those gut reactions that we sometimes come off with. I think it's these things happen, people get offended, and I understand that. My mother told me, she said, a gentleman never offends anyone unintentionally. And so I try to be aware of that, and I try to make sure that I don't take other people's offense sometimes, if unless they intend it to be offensive. And it's just kind of, it's the way I am. But I really want us to kind of, I just want to share that. I think we need to approach this issue and all that we do in this area with love in our hearts, because that's gonna make the deepest and most lasting impact, I believe.
Thank you, Del, and thank you for sharing what that looks like for you. Thank you so much. Christal.
Well, the onus is on me to do the work, and so I take responsibility for my own emotional intelligence. And then, if I have the time and if I want to, I share what I've learned with other people. But I don't allow anyone else to put that responsibility on me. It's my own responsibility. And then in my own time, if I have some information to share that's going to enlighten other people, then I do so. I certainly do so in the trainings that I do with boards. So I take responsibility for my own learning in this space.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. And, as we close out for today, one of my favorite quotes that I love to share, y'all know I'm a quote person by now, it's from Robin Sharma, and he says, leadership is not about a title or a designation. It's about impact, influence, and inspiration. Impact involves getting results. Influence is about spreading the passion you have for your work, and you have to inspire teammates and customers. And so, as you all have talked about, the leadership, the love, the inspiration, doing it afraid, getting support, I hope and really thank all of you for coming out today. And I will yield back the time to our facilitators to close us out. I just want to say thank you all for sharing time with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Mariama. It's been so, our gratitude to you, our facilitators and panelists, Taylor Biro, Darryl Jones, E-Marie Sissle, Antonio Montoya, Kelly Otto, Christal, Sherry, Del Suggs, and our artist, April Fitzpatrick, for making our time together so engaging and so thought-provoking. So we're asking you to mark your calendars for our next DEI and TLH event, a town hall Tuesday on August 24th. A survey link is in the chat, so please fill that out and tell us what you think. And a recording of today's symposium will be available on each host website by the end of the week. Also, be sure to join us tomorrow, because there's a new American Rescue Plan Act grant program info session that's being launched. It's 1 p.m. tomorrow via Zoom. Again, that link is in the chat. And also sign up, post, and follow, collaborate Big Ben for other news. So thank you again for everyone, for my co-hosts, for Amber R. Tynan and Felina Martin, to our amazing staffs at INIE, COCA, and UPHS for making this happen today, and especially for all of you for joining us. Again, thank you again for sticking with us, for being here today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Stay connected, stay safe.